think it'd be really interesting to have a conversation around ethical leadership and innovation.
I'd like to know from David how ethics might feel like it could cramp the style of creativity and innovation.
Thank you. Well, the short answer is I don't think it does at all, because all creative acts occur in a set of limitations, be that the limit, the environment or the resources that you have, or your guiding lights, the purpose that drives you. These are all essentially filters through which we process our experience, and therefore that we use to filter our actions. So if you choose to be guided by a certain set of ethics, I think that is just as limiting as having a particular personal style or being well versed in a particular skill or a particular information set. It's just another filter. So I mean, yes, it does limit it, but no more than any other limit that you can think of. Right. So, Josuel, while I was answering that question, it made me think a little bit about hip hop and remixing. Where does the originality and the next step, the maverickness, come into it when, I mean, I loved what you said about let's just take the interesting part of the records and dance to that all night, which is fantastic. But where does the magic source come from that keeps that interesting?
Ooh, that's a very nice question. So where does the magic source come from that keeps that going? So the interesting thing about, I'm going to say, remixing and sampling, and I'm going to grab it now from a music perspective, is changing tones, speeding up, slowing down, taking a little piece of something and maybe creating something totally new out of it already makes it very, I'm going to say, spicy, creative, in to see, hey, what can be created. It's almost like cooking. I mean, if you take, I'm going to choose a random, if you take kurkuma, I hope I said that correctly. If you can take it and, for example, some people, they put it in food with rice. Someone came up with, hey, but we can also make tea out of this, and it will be really healthy for you. So that keeps it changing, that keeps the spice coming, and the same goes with, if you look at hip hop creativity, it looks at what are the tools that we have, what are the things that we can use, and how can we use them in a new way or combine them to create something new. And it's with all of these things, it's always a hit or miss. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And the idea is learning from, hey, what doesn't work, and to just keep going on that. Hey, this doesn't work. Okay, let's change it. If it's someone who's, for example, making a beat or producing a record, okay, this pitch doesn't work. What happens if I turn the pitch down or turn the pitch up? And the turning the pitch down and turning the pitch up is actually what we do daily in our own lives. We adjust depending on what the situation is, on maybe even our moods, or hey, what is the result that we want? Do we want something to go faster, or do we need a moment for it to slow down so that we can take it in and process it all?
Great answer. Thank you.
Oh, now it's on me to ask the question. Judith, we look at it from a Maverick perspective and a Maverick leadership perspective. I mean, they've already looked at, hey, how is creativity and ethics, how does that come together? And then I looked at, okay, let's see if you take all the little stuff and you create something new. How can a Maverick leader, a Maverick, someone who thinks totally out of the box, keep themselves within the ethic box without jumping out of it consciously or subconsciously?
That's a really good question. And I think we have to consider what Maverick leadership's about. Maverick leaders is all about working for the greater good. so that whatever they're doing is for the greater good. And I think when you have that as a cornerstone to what you're doing, ethics, which is, all that kind of morality and a systemized way of looking at things, it becomes easier. Now, where there's difficulty is if the group or the society you're in has ethics that you don't agree with, then the Maverick leader will jump right out of that box and say no. And there's lots of things that we can look at in the past where society has said this is okay, and other people have said no, it isn't. So I think if you looked at an organization like, say, Enron, I would say a Maverick leader would have stepped out of the ethics of that organization and would have said no. So I think it's an interesting question, because I think the people who we are, we're prone to think of the good anyway. So we're thinking about how do we stop a Maverick from doing bad? And I just think if we opened up a little bit and say, well, ethics is a society, it's a community agreement of what's right and what's wrong. And I think as Maverick leaders, we need to step back and go, do we agree with what society, community, organisationally, do we agree with those ethics? And if we don't, then the interesting question is then, what do we do with that going forward? So that's cool. Thanks for that question. I think that's quite an interesting one. Okay, let me think. So Astrid, I'm all about creating clear thinking and decisive leaders. And it could be argued that if someone's looking at something from an ethical standpoint, it stops them from being decisive, because that's an argument I've heard before. It's like, oh, we can't do what we want to do because it's not ethical. What do you think about that when people are using the argument that ethics stops you from being decisive?
I think that it's an interesting response when people say we can't do that because we have to be ethical about it. That does make me question. Perhaps it would be helpful just to lay down a few markers for the interest of clarity. I'm not talking about a specific system. I am not myself a person of faith, so I'm not talking about anything coming at leadership from through the lens of any particular belief system. It goes back to that Maverick point about working for the greater good, to first do no harm, as they say for medics. I firmly believe that is a role that leadership needs to take forward. And if you are going to do harm by being indecisive, and if your decision-making parameters are questionable, then frankly, it doesn't matter how decisive you're going to be, you're really, really at short odds of having something that is an outcome from your decision-making that is ethically questionable, open to debate. It goes really to the heart of who the Maverick leader is, I would argue, that there's the ability to decide and make a decision based on the value system that is in the here and now. Okay. What is relevant? What is ethically right now? What suits my personal or my workplace ecology? And I'm not talking about whether you have a pond in the middle of the kitchen. I'm talking about the interpersonal ecology. That stuff has got to inform your decision making. Okay. And that has to be the parameters.
Brilliant, thank you. I think before we wrap up, it'd be just interesting, I think, to just ask each one of you how you see innovation in the things that you're writing about for the Maverick Paradox magazine. I'm going to start with you, David.
Heraclitus said, the only constant in life is change. Therefore, if you're not thinking about innovation, you're falling behind the curve. So while it may not always look like what I'm talking about in my columns is specifically innovation, it's certainly about addressing the ongoing change that we exist in. Because if you don't, a black swan's going to come along and catch you out, and you'll be playing catch up for the rest of your career. It's about adopting a mindset which is focused on the idea that we are not there yet, that we are in progress, that we are along the road, rather than this is set in stone, and on basis of this thing, we're now going to act a certain way. No, it's not about that at all. And while that attitude may give you a large sense of calm and certainty about things, it's disingenuous and risky.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. Josuel, what's your thoughts on what you write?
Ooh, always quite interesting following up on David. So for me, what I write is a lot of random links that I see during the day, during the month, during the week, anything that pops up. And as we say, innovation is also about connecting dots, certain dots that usually people would not see. In my writing, I try to give the person as much dots as possible. So, and that also makes that my columns make the, I'm going to say, the strangest of links. And then I really focus it back to, hey, what is it personally? What is it from a mindset perspective? So innovating someone's mindset, looking at, hey, how are things in nature? Is the nature, for example, is the nature that we see a natural nature, or is it a nature that we have created out of necessity or out of usefulness? And then taking that back to, hey, what are steps that I do for myself that are maybe created out of necessity or out of usefulness, and taking that reflection moment, and within that reflection moment, giving them a reflection moment, but also some nuggets of interesting lore, interesting information that they might not have known or not have thought of, which will give them a little, in their subconscious, it gives them an extra tool in their toolbox that might all of a sudden pop up when they're maybe at random in a meeting talking about, hey, how are we going to take the business one step further today?
Brilliant. Thank you. And Astrid?
When I write for the Maverick Paradox, it feels like I bear witness. And that means I find myself commenting on the world around me, seeing that through my Maverick lens, but also sometimes calling out behavior, sometimes identifying behavior in leadership that isn't really leadership. It is someone who's at the forefront and who's ordering people around, but that's not actually leadership. And I think as we move on in the 21st century, I'm really, I'm old enough to span both. And there is quite a lot of change that I'm seeing where the ethics and the sustainability is coming in as a nice to have. And we don't have time for that. And so increasingly my writing calls out the things that are slowing down the decision making that we need to have made.
Brilliant. And for me, it's obviously around about creating clear thinking and decisive leaders. And I wanted to create a platform for the pathologically curious, for those that want to learn from lateral thinkers. So thank you very much for being key economists for the magazine and joining us on this panel.